What's up, YouTube? Mr. Lime SC here, and I just want to have a chat about Diablo 2 and Diablo 2 Resurrected. Now, I know some people have seen me talk before with some stuff in Diablo 4. They've seen me talk about the survey. They've seen me mention here and there about things like, oh, I don't like the charm inventory or whatever, things like that, and have created whole elaborate ideas of everything I believe and all of that stuff. And a lot of that stuff is reaction. It comes with other stuff. Obviously, I'm always live streaming when I'm doing this stuff, so a lot of the stuff isn't planned and thought out. And this is also live streamed and not 100% planned and thought out, because this is still just how I do all my content. You can call it lazy content, whatever you want. That's totally fine. But this is how I do it. But I've written down a few notes because there's some things that I feel like I want to discuss in terms of where my positions are with these things and where I think going forward would be good. So the first thing I want to talk about is why Diablo 2 is the best RPG game ever made. And it's fine if you disagree with this. This is my personal opinion. This is why I have 28,000 hours in this game or whatever, because of these sorts of reasons. So I'm just giving you my reasoning for why I love this game. I will also give reasoning for why I don't love this game. But obviously I ultimately end up loving it more, right? So some of those reasons. The first thing is the overall meshing of all of the features is very well done. And I'll explain these features coming up, but the overall mesh is gorgeous and beautiful, and the whole game experience feels very uniform to me. And that's something that I really appreciate about it. We'll get into that more as we discuss the features. So one of the first features is the audio. The music in the game is absolutely fantastic. You can find so many different places in the game, locations, and you can remember, oh, the music down in the palace, oh, the music when you enter Act 5, oh, the music when you're in Tristram. Like, each and every one of these zones has this distinct music style, and you remember it. And it's just beautiful, and it's something that in so many other games, music can be good, but I don't always remember it. And this is something I think Blizzard does extremely well in many games. I think back to like Terran. I mean, any music in StarCraft, right? Like Brood War, like so much good music there. I think to like some of the music, like Orc 2 and things like that, and like Warcraft. And there's a lot of just like really good music in all the games. I feel like Diablo 2, knocked it out of the park as well, and has some of my favorite music of all time. And once again, I can really distinctly remember different acts, different locations where it is. Additionally, to go with audio, you have beautiful in-game sounds. Just like close your eyes right now, you can hear an amulet or a ring dropping. You can hear when somebody picks up a skull, that when you put a skull into the inventory or whatever it is. You can hear the cubing of stuff and the dropping of things, like the raw sounds of the town portals. All of the sounds fit so well into the game, and it is amazing how much they add to Diablo 2, I should say, right? Like when I play so many other games, I find myself often disappointed because the sound isn't believable enough for me. Whether it's the swinging sound, the connecting when you hit a monster. That's one of also the most satisfying things when you actually hit a monster. Like any and all of these things, there's just so many great sounds, and it all once again feels like it fits in the world. It keeps me invested in the world and believing that I'm a part of the world, essentially, right? If that makes any sense. Thirdly, with audio, the voice acting in this game is absolutely fantastic. It's amazing today, billion-dollar studios creating AAA games, and their voice acting is garbage compared to like Diablo 2 voice acting. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like it's insane how well they found the voice acting for Diablo 2, because there's never a person who talks in Diablo 2 where I go, Eh, yeah, that's never mind. That's taken me out of it. This is bad voice act, whatever it is. Like, it's just amazing. I don't know. The voice acting in Diablo 2 I find is superb. So audio wise, I feel like 10 out of 10, one of the best like audio from across the board games to exist. Moving forward, I also believe the difficulty curve is one of the best and most important things in Diablo 2 that really makes the game solid. There is a perfect or near perfect, in my opinion, it could be slightly adjusted, progression from walking out into the Bloodmoor in normal, where you just hit, whatever, right? Like, you can't die in the Bloodmoor. You can't, like, it's just, once again, as they said, they wanted to make it so their mom could play it. And that's not a shot at any moms. They're saying their moms who didn't play games, they wanted to make sure they could, like, get up and at least get out and start hitting things, right? And they did a great job with that. It starts out, it's very easy. You go, you hit monsters, and then it just progresses up. And as you go through Nightmare, you start adding in some difficulty. And Nightmare's a little too easy in some places, I actually think. But then you start getting some of the, difficult stuff, and you get to the later acts in Nightmare, and it gets more difficult. And then you get to Hell, and it really ramps up. And it's just, the game plays very hard. It's a very tough game to play through. And I really love that. I think it makes it super fun. You get a lot of progression feeling, and you get a lot of like feel good as you slowly grow your level, get better skills, get better items, all that stuff. And then you can kind of go and kill those areas. And this is something that I love about a game that doesn't have everywhere is based on your level, because in my opinion, I find it's more rewarding for me when I go to an area that I had trouble in before, and then I find a way to beat it. Like, the difficulty of the area stays the same. I can't just make it easier by adjusting a difficulty setting, or, it's just always whatever my level is, and so like it's always going to be the same difficulty for me. But I go there and, the Travancore, they murder me. I go back, I level up a little more, I get a couple more items, then I go back to the Travancore, and then I beat them. To me, that's very, like, rewarding, and I love that idea so much more than the everywhere is the same level, and it just always raises with your level. Does this mean that later down the line you can't go back to Act 1 Cold Plains and farm around there? Sure, it knocks some zones out in the later stages. That's kind of a trade-off. But for me, I appreciate the constant kind of push and progression as I go forward. So once again, you might have a different opinion. That's how I feel about it. Now, continuing with that, one of the things I really love about Diablo 2 is that it's an easy to play game with a lot of hidden complexity. So once again, the idea is, can their mom, David Brevik's mom, play this game? Can she go in, press the single player button, press create character, name a character, run outside and start hitting things? When she levels up, she sees the little red cross. Like, is she going to get far through the game and have all of the like crazy ideas about, what's the optimal level to, area to find some gloves so that you can craft for the best stuff, but you don't want to craft at the highest level because you don't want to get some of those other affixes? And is there, are we farming for gem shrines in the stony field because the best chance to get... She's not going to ever get into any of that stuff. That's for me. That's for the people who play 20,000 hours in this game. They go and dig into the files of the game and look at all of these crazy things about how to shop a scepter with plus a holy shield on it and all sorts of ridiculous things, right? Like, all of these, the insane depth to the game is amazing because there's so much stuff, whether it's from map generation and figuring out all the tile sets and the ways that they can move, whether it's the crafting, whether it's the, the PvP that gets really intense, or any of the stuff that I just talked about with like the files and how they generate items and chests and racks and all of that stuff. The complexity is across the board crazy, but it's not necessary. To play the game, you can always play the game at the base level. You go in, you get your items, you level up, you plus your skills, you do your little guide, you go through, you can always play through the game and have a really good time, but there's still all of that extra if you would like it. Now, additionally, one of the things I love with Diablo 2 is the art style and just the environments overall. I feel like every act really has a beautiful art, and I actually love the pixel art. I'm totally cool with the remaster art. I think like the fire, and there's a lot of cool things within it. So I'm very excited to see a lot of this stuff remastered. But I also really love the pixel art. I think that it's kind of like taking a photorealistic picture and putting it next to an artist rendition and stuff. And it's like, that one looks better. And you're like, well, it looks exactly like the real thing, but I still like the artistic interpretation more, right? So I feel like Diablo 2 is a little bit more of the like artistic interpretation, a little bit more of the game, right? I don't think games need to look perfectly beautiful in every detail, all the stuff, to be gorgeous. That being said, I think updating the graphics will be cool. Like I said, I think seeing the graphics that they've shown look really nice. Getting the game from 800 by 600 to a full screen, like widescreen, 1920 by 1080 or 4K, like that stuff's cool and will be better overall for the game. But regardless, art style is one thing, but the environments as well, I think are very interesting. And I love the difference in the environment throughout the game. I feel like one of the things that's really the best is that the environments feel so different, right? I feel like sometimes when I play through other games, the environment feels the same, even though there's a different like style around. Like you have trees and you've got some mountains and you've got some whatever stuff, but like it still feels like it plays exactly the same. What I feel like in Diablo 2 is it's very different. In Act 1, you have kind of your squares, right? Everything is the square, and you follow the path pretty much all the way through, right? And it's just kind of open fields, and then you go into jails, dungeons, and all of that stuff, and it's kind of very tight and narrow and all that stuff, but like still some spacing. In Act 2, you have this big open deserts, but you've got kind of always the like cliffs, and you've got kind of their separated areas. And then when you go into places, you've got like the Maggot Lair and the Arcane Sanctuary. And they're like tight little narrow paths, and you've got to deal with them in different ways. And the Arcane, and you got the tombs, and they're all spread. Then you go to Act 3, and you're just in these winding jungles that are 2x6 blocks. And it's like crazy, and you're lost. And you're like, do I go in the Great March? Where's the Flare Jungle at? Why are there so many places? You get like lost in it. Then you go to Act 4 and you get the Chaos Sanctuary, which is just this whole gorgeous like area that's perfect for a boss fight, where you have to go and clear out each of the sections just to, kill the bosses, and the monsters are really difficult in it. And then you go and fight there. And then Act 5 gets kind of back to that like just the long straight path to the end. And you're just kind of going through kind of these like different, cold zones. Everything feels really like cold. There's a lot of cold monsters. There's a lot of stuff to like freeze you along the way, and monsters that'll stun you, and you got death lords and yetis and all of that stuff. And I really feel like each zone, the monsters, the maps, the play is so different and unique that they all really feel like a different area. And like I said, I feel like when I play a lot of other games, it's like you just have that big open path, and you just kind of wind through it, and it, and you go into the cave, and like everything just kind of blends together, and there's not enough difference of how the monsters fight, how the like narrow and wide the paths are, how it winds through everything, all of that stuff. So I think that's one of the big reasons that I love Diablo 2, is every act is its own like game almost in how it feels. Now, one of the best things about Diablo 2, and something that I think many games have tried to copy a little and change and whatever stuff and blah, 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 and you guys probably know where I'm going with this, is itemization. That's right. The itemization, I could talk for hours on this, and I won't. I'm just going to mention a couple small things. The itemization in Diablo 2 is like nearly perfect. The way that they incorporate white items, gray items, blue items, rare items, ethereal, right? So you've got socketed and ethereal items, uniques. Sets are a little bit weak. That's the only one. They could do a little bit more with some sets, but not like make them like D3 where you just wear the whole set and that's it. Uniques, crafted items, like all of the itemization in Diablo 2 is just so fantastic. The affix pool is absolutely insane. And it really just always has this idea that there's always something you can improve. And it's not improved in the way of a bigger stat stick. But there's always such a good comparison and such a good give and take. Okay, well, if I give this piece up, these boots have 10 faster hit recovery, 17 fire res, half freeze duration on them. And if I give those up, I can get 20 faster run walk, 11 light res, and 22 poison res. And you're like, do I want the hit recovery and the half freeze duration, or is the faster run walk and the light res more important? And okay, well, I've got enough fire res so I can take these off. And right, you're always making these decisions, and it's so beautiful because once again, it's not just, oh, this is a bigger stat, so I put the bigger stat on. And that's what I love about Diablo's itemization. And whether you are going for, early game when you're just running around and picking up those garbage boots and stuff, to even like end game stuff of trying to find the best fathom and things. Like my sorceress has like a 28%, 39, 35 resistance fathom or something like that. And that's not perfect yet. And so I'm still like hunting for the small improvements, even on my level 99 sorceress with like 2,000, 3,000 hours on her. Like she still hunts around for some of those things. And it's such a great feeling because there's always that improvement. And something that's also great is it's not just the well thought out interaction between builds and items, because there's also many items like a chaos claw, or, if you want to be like a bear sorceress or whatever, there's lots of cool like build to item combinations with things. But it's just the underlying system for determining what can be dropped, gambled, crafted, where can it be dropped, at what character level can it be dropped, all of these things. And this is something that a lot of people, many don't even know, but don't fully appreciate, in my opinion, is just the beauty of as you move through the game to the higher areas, to the higher bosses, you have your treasure classes and you have your area levels. And depending on the area level and the monster level, what type of items can that monster drop? And so it's one that is like, okay, well, I'm going to go farm in this area for a little bit more of this because I need to get, like Haas can't drop here and I want to find that. But Gilded Shields are like a hard treasure class item to find. And all of those things, in my opinion, are gorgeous, right? This is the added depth of you don't have to know all of these things. You can just go around and kill stuff and take whatever gear you get and cool. But by going forward, you're always improving. And if you want to really learn and get into the details of every single thing that a person or a boss drops and the best odds for it and what you should wear and all of that, like you can, right? But obviously you don't have to do all that. But I just love the itemization in the game. I think it is so perfect. I think the only thing I would like more is sets could be a little bit better designed, especially kind of at some lower mid-level stuff. There's definitely some sets in there that just never make any sense. And I think giving sets a spot in the game where, I found this and this piece, and when I put them on, like it gives me a little boost for a tiny bit of time until I swap it off, right? You don't really find that very often in the game, and that disappoints me a little bit. But other than that, I feel like it's great. It's just gorgeous, and that's good. Then the last thing I would say with the items is the crafting. It's I feel like crafting works a little bit better on multiplayer when you can like trade for perfect gems more and all of these things. But if you're just crafting in like single player, it's pretty difficult to craft anything that's even like remotely useful. You can obviously craft along the way, and I actually like a lot of the crafting along the way, getting like crafting some blood gloves or crafting, a belt or a caster ammy or, something when you're playing through the game. I actually think the crafting works out okay. But getting those like better rolls to craft is insanely hard. It's absolutely ridiculously hard. So those are my minor like complaints with it. But overall, I think the system works really well. Now, here is a quote by someone in Diablo. They say, Diablo 2's drop rates calculations that determine how often and of what quality items drop were finely tuned over 3 years of production. If better items drop too often, players will grow numb to the steady stream of upgrades. If they don't drop often enough, players will get frustrated because a boss is proving too difficult to defeat with their current equipment setup, or because they're not receiving enough loot to stay invested in the clicking. If the drop rate is just right, players will look forward to getting a new sword, staff, helm, or pair of boots, even if it's gear they can't use quite yet, and even as they bond with the gear they currently have. The boots that increase their walk and run speed by 10%, the sword socketed with 2 sapphires to add cold damage and slow enemies, the chainmail socketed with 3 diamonds to boost their resistances. Well, that doesn't work like that anymore. The shield socketed with 3 diamonds to boost all their resistances, the gloves that bump each of their skills up by 1 point, etc. And that is a really like great way to put it. That was from the developers. That is the perfect way to say it. You feel bonded to the gear that you have, and yet you also feel the need to replace it, right? Like I have a shield with a couple diamonds in it. I'm ready to replace it as I get something better. I'm bonded to the the stealth armor I have, but now I found Nephilim and I can make a smoke. And so I'm going to lose my FCR and FHR and FRW, but I'm going to gain big res. And so actually I think you get a FHR on it, but regardless, so it's like, there's always those trades, right? And so you're bonding with the stuff you have, but you're constantly being able to eventually get to something better with it not being too far away. Okay. So the last thing I want to say is there's also a great diversity among areas and targets. And this is something that I think about for like later game, because a lot of stuff I talk about, obviously I speedrun the game, I play through the game a lot. And so I'm thinking from Act 1 to Act 5, Normal, Nightmare, Hell. But also when I think about endgame, I think about this. The diverse areas and targets in the game really improves it. There's all sorts of runs to go and do for endgame content. You can do straight boss runs, go farming Mephisto, farming Baal, farming, Endario, whatever it is. You can do the area run, so you can go and farm, your pits. You can farm your ancient tunnels. You can farm Mausoleum if you're weird. You can farm, Maggot Lair if you're crazy, whatever. You can farm those areas, right? You can do your mixed runs. All right, we're going to kill the Chaos Sanctuary, Diablo, and then immediately go to Baal, and we'll do this for our leveling cycle. You can do lower cursed runs to try and get runes, to try and get gems, to try and get charms, all of that. You can do Travigal runs to try and get runes, to try and get some more like rings and ammies, and go for maybe some like gold finding and stuff, right? You've got gold find barbs who purely just want to do that stuff. There's so many different areas and places that you can go and farm for these different sorts of items and runes and gems and whatever. And it really, it just has a lot of diversity there. And so to me, it's really fun to go to the end game because you just have so much to do. And on top of that, this goes just to what is end game in Diablo 2 as well. Endgame in Diablo 2 is whatever you want it to be. And that's kind of a fun thing, is the developers didn't say, this is how you have to play the game. You have to do, and I'll use Diablo 3, and maybe it's not the best, but like Greater Rifts is endgame Diablo 3, and that's kind of all the characters go for, and you have the leaderboard, and you just try and go like faster through the rifts and do a higher rift, right? You don't have trading. You don't have PvP, right? Like Diablo 2, a lot of endgame. I've had endgames where I just sit there and trade all the time. And I just want to like get as much awesome gear as I can and just make like awesome characters. And so that's all I did. I barely did any other content. I just traded with people nonstop. Obviously, PvP in Diablo 2 is really, really good. A lot of people love it. And a lot of people build their characters purely for PvP. Some people want to try and grind for level 99 and just spend that time going through. Some people just love going out and just farming and stuff and just, you know, getting new things and trying to find all the different gear in the game, doing the holy grails, right? All of that stuff. So to me, the end game of Diablo 2 being so open and free has actually been really good for the game, rather than the developer saying, this is end game, this is what you do here. They just kind of let it exist and be, and people found out what kind of end game they wanted. Some people just want to try and craft the coolest thing, or find the coolest rare, or just do gold finding and, you know, just like mess around with different kinds of characters and see what sort of crazy Uber builds they can do. Who knows? There's like so many different things you can do, and it's really great. Now, one other piece I want to mention, this is something that I'll mention kind of a little bit later, but I love the insane loot structure of Diablo 2 as well, where it's impossible to find everything. You're not going to find all of the awesome items and runes and things in the game. Will you ever find a Zod rune? Maybe, probably not. Will you ever craft the craziest thing? Probably not. Will you ever find a J-mod? Probably not. But it's out there and they exist, and you can maybe find those things and maybe not. And there's, you know, the Tyrael's Might and all of that stuff. And I love that it's not easy to just get it all, right? There's always that improvement piece out there. There's always those crazy things. And to me, that makes the game really rewarding for the high-end player, while also being rewarding for the more casual player, right? Because they can always be improving their stuff. But you don't want to give a casual player everything, because if they can get everything, then what the person who plays more than them isn't going to be able to get any of that stuff. Another thing about Diablo 2 that I absolutely love is monsters are unique. And I don't mean unique monsters in the game. I mean the monsters themselves actually have an effect in the game, or a style in the game, and you play around them based on what kind of monster it is. And this is something that I feel is really lacking as we go forward with games, and so many of the ARPGs that I've seen nowadays. I don't care what the monster is, because I just murder it all instantly, or it doesn't have a big enough difference between me and all of that stuff. It's just kind of fodder, right? It's just something that is going to die, and that's it. In Diablo 2, monsters are extremely unique in the way that they function. From dolls to deathlords to souls to vipers to tainteds to bats to, I mean, every kind of monster is extremely unique. And I can sit there and think about all of the different areas as I'm playing through the game, and what's different about the monsters and how I have to play differently. If I want to be up close on them, if I want to be trying to range them, if I want to be kiting them, if I need to avoid them because they're, you know, getting surrounded because they're going to stun me or not. Like, there's so many different monster combinations. And on top of that, you throw in immunities, which we'll talk about immunities a little bit later. But you throw in immunities, and now the monsters are even more different, because these monsters are cold immune, and I do cold damage. So crap, I need to like get out the way, you know? I need to avoid them. I'm not going to be able to slow them down from getting to me, and they're extra fast, and it's even harder. So it's just beautiful, and I think this is the game where monsters mean the most, and that's one of my favorite things about Diablo 2. Is that it actually is like, you care everywhere you go. You care about that. You're just watching the hand movements. I'm Italian. I'm going to speak with my hands. All right. Additionally, I love places like, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I love places like the Maggot Lair and the Arcane Sanctuary. And I know if you watch me play, you'll be like, Mr. Llama, I see you say, ugh, I hate the Arcane Sanctuary and I hate the Maggot Lair. And that's good. It's good to have places in a game that you hate. Like, in my opinion. And you'll say, you're contradicting yourself. You don't know, blah, blah, blah. But like, once again, it gives that difference to the environment. Sometimes having difficult things, having hard things in a game is good. And some people, I feel like, don't understand this. And these are the people who always disagree with me on everything because they're like, that makes no sense. If something's difficult, it should be removed and just made easier. But I don't think so. Like, those are the things that make the game what it is. They make it unique, whether it's a long travel time to somewhere in some other game or some difficult to do maneuver or, you know, whatever it is. Those places, the water temple in Ocarina of Time, it sucks, but like if every dungeon was really easy, then it'd be like not as good of a game. Like having those things is good for a game. And I actually want to go up and use a great example, a little bit of difficulty and complexion. So there's a game called Escape from Tarkov. It's a shooter game, FPS. And one of the things that they have in it is they have a manual reloading process. And what I love about the reloading process is that they made it a difficult thing and it has complexity to it. And it's fantastic. So you can press R for reloading. And if you have your gun, you take the mag out, you put it in your inventory, you grab the next mag and you put the mag in. Cool. That's great. You can also double tap R to do an emergency reload, which takes the mag out and throws it and then puts another one in. Now you lose the mag when you do this, but you're going to reload a little bit faster. So obviously in a difficult situation, you're reloading a little faster. Makes sense, right? Better to lose a mag than to die. Now, on top of that, if your gun is shot dry, you'll actually need a chamber in the round after reloading a magazine. So, depending on a gun, I might need to grab the charging handle to manually cycle around into the chamber, adding more time into my reload. So I can go from having a 4-second reload if I have a gun that I shot dry and need to do a full reload on, right? To having like a 2.5 second reload on a gun that has a bullet in the chamber and I'm doing an emergency reload on. And all of this information is fantastic because you can consider all of this when you're heading into a fight or into a zone. How many magazines am I taking into the fight? Am I counting the shots or watching the ammo to make sure I don't shoot dry? When am I throwing a mag to emergency reload mid-fight and losing that mag? How often am I doing it? Does the zone have a lot of space to do these longer reloads, or do I need to be more worried about that? What weapons do I want to bring into this area because of their reload times? All of these things are a beautiful, look how many decisions and combinations of things that added to the complexity of the game by this difficult decision that's been added in. And now a lot of people would just say, oh, well, that's just so difficult and complicated with all the different reload. Just make it reload easy and automatic, and it's just the same thing. Let's just get rid of this whole thing. I don't like it that I can shoot dry because I miscounted, and now I have this extra reload time and I died. That's stupid, right? People will say these things, but this is the whole thing that they say as well with Diablo 2, and these are the small decisions that I really want people to think about when we look at those things like people talked about in that survey, right? Which is, if we make all of these little annoying, difficult steps, whatever you want to call them, right? If you make all of these decisions simplified, it might make it a better experience for that quick time. So it's like, oh, I've died multiple times because this stupid long reload, like, it'd be a better experience if I could just reload and not have to worry about all that stuff. But then once again, you take out all of that meaningful decision. You take out that immersion. You take out all of the stuff, all of those questions that I asked about. What do I need to do planning going into this fight? And these are the things that, in my mind, make a game great. These are the things that make the game absolutely amazing rather than make the game fun for a little while and then you get bored with it, right? because they're the small incremental steps that you can take to get a little bit more of an edge, the extra clicks that you make. And these are the things that will make you feel rewarded as a player for thinking about. Wow, I'm so glad that I thought to bring 2 extra mags because I needed to do some, I knew I was going to need some emergency reloads in there, and that's better, right? And keeping track of the ammo and all of that stuff, right? Those are the things that increase your immersion and increase the beauty of a game. So when I look at all of the decisions and all of the things that people talk about with Diablo 2 of let's do this, let's make this easier, and let's buff this and all of this stuff, every time I think back to these small decisions like in Tarkov right there and in other games, and I think back to, okay, this simplifies this process, but is that actually beneficial to the game overall? Or is it something that is going to make it a little too easy or simplify something that's actually nice to have because it improves the skill of the player that learns it a little bit better, right? So the nuances are improving the game, in my opinion, rather than ruining it. And this kind of goes to the idea a little bit of like inventory Tetris and stuff. Why do I like inventory Tetris in Diablo 2? Sure, you could remove it and you could have it be like some of the other games like D3 or whatever, where everything just fits in a nice square. But then you remove the small ideas of, do I want to pick up this big item or this little item? Which one is worth more? What's worth more to have in my inventory? How do I want to have this space in my inventory? What do I want to set up my charms versus my cube versus all that? And obviously, endgame, we can talk about charms. We'll do that in a bit. But these are the things that, in my opinion, are beneficial to the game. And when you remove it and everything just takes a slot and whatever it is, you don't think anymore about that. And so there's a little less immersion, right, into the game. A world where a giant scythe and a little dagger take up the same space. It doesn't really make sense, right? Like one should be bigger than the other. So you lose a little bit of immersion in the world, but you also lose the decision of, do I want to carry this? Is this scythe worth 4 times a dagger to have in my inventory? That sort of stuff, right? So moving forward, let's see. Here is another quote from one of the developers. He said, "Why is it so hard for developers to understand that the base core gameplay mechanic isn't the leveling up or the item collection, it's the clicking?" And I thought this was actually a nice quote because I agree. I think the clicking is the part that's actually rewarding, right? It's clicking to kill, clicking to move, clicking to pick it up, clicking to make. Every click you make is a decision, and those decisions are the rewarding piece. Whether you are clicking for something that's as minor as what do I want to put into my stash, or clicking on what do you want to buy, clicking on what do you want to trade, or clicking on your positioning when you're fighting, right? Every click is a decision that you make, and more clicks that are rewarding is better. And this is where the idea of, if you take away too many of those clicks, if too much of that stuff is automated and it just auto-fills, all the potions auto-fill into your belt, all the gold auto-fills into your inventory, right? If you do all of that stuff, then you remove so many of those clicks and it makes it easier for sure and simplifies some of that stuff, but you're not getting the decision once again to be made of, am I picking this up or not? And I think that's always an important thing that I like to think about. Is this too much that's giving you, like it's just giving you too much, right? Are you no longer making all of these decisions along the way? And, and sure, you can say a speedrunner is going to make all these decisions a little bit more. Other people might just go back to town, sell everything, come back, pick it all up, whatever. But eventually they're going to make the decision of, yeah, I don't care to actually pick up the bolts and arrows and that buckler and that, low quality wolf head. Instead, I'm going to pick up the wand and the staff and the rare item and that's things, right? Like they're going to make decisions, even if they're not perfect decisions. They're going to make their own decisions. And I think it's important to have that. One other thing I really love about Diablo 2 is hit recovery, block recovery, frame rates, and a lot of people don't like these things. And it's okay if you disagree with me on this. That's fine. I personally love them because they create a situation where positioning and tactics are enough to make it out in almost any situation, right? It increases the skill ceiling so much because you can't just dive into the middle of a group of monsters, right? You're just going to get locked up and you're just stunned forever. So you're constantly having to make the decision of, how am I going to fight? How am I going to avoid this monster trying to hit me? How am I going to do all of these things? Because if I don't, I can get stuck in hit recovery, right? The monster puts me in hit recovery and it prevents me from getting through that gap. Like you're constantly assessing risk that you would be taking as you're going through. Additionally, things like block recovery, if you're blocking, it should take a little time. Once again, a little bit of immersion in the world. You block and it takes time to block before you go to the next thing. These sorts of things, in my opinion, make the game better because one, they give you things to focus on for other affixes. I want to increase my hit recovery. I want to increase my faster cast rate. I want to increase my, blocking, whatever it is. But additionally, they give you just so much skill and positioning when you're out fighting. And when I can go into the Chaos Sanctuary and navigate it better than somebody else because I'm using my positioning and tactics and hit recovery and all of that stuff better than somebody else, that's rewarding to me. And that's something that I think makes a game good. And what I really dislike about a lot of games that I see right now is there's just the damage idea. And you can just run through the middle of a giant pack of monsters and they just kind of push out of the way and whatever stuff. And you don't get blocked in. They don't hit you and lock you up, anything like that. And they really are taking a lot of the positioning out of a lot of games. And that's always really disappointing to me because it just doesn't make sense. Like, to me, you need to kind of have that stuff. You need to have some worry about where you're going to be. Otherwise, the game, once again, gets too simple. It doesn't matter what the environment is. It doesn't matter what the monsters are. None of those things matter because nothing's going to stop you from moving or doing anything. So I think having that stuff is really important in a game. And so that's why I love Diablo 2. Now, that is why Diablo 2 is the best ARPG game ever made. Now let's talk about Diablo 2 and some of the things that aren't so good about it, and maybe some things that could use a change, and some of the stuff that they've discussed, and changes that I think would be good, I don't care too much about, and what I think would be bad. So the first thing, I think we should take a look at the history of Diablo 2 and discuss a little bit of where it came from and where we are now. One thing that we really want to look from 1.0 to today is what are the changes that they've introduced, right? And there's been a lot of changes. If you watched my 1.0 Boazon or anything like that, you can watch plenty. First off, gold used to be a lot more important back then. It was a lot harder to get gold and use gold and sell things for gold and all of that stuff. So gold kind of lost some importance over time. They've added in rune words. They've added in more sets. They've added in better uniques. They've added in, second weapon slots, bigger stashes, yada, 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 all of these things. And some of it was good changes for sure. A lot of it was power creep. Some of the power creep was all right. Some of the power creep I felt like was a little too much, right? And they went a little too far. What are some of those examples? Well, the first one is some of the overpowered rune words. My greatest example for this is not Enigma, it's Grief, actually. My greatest example for this is Grief. The reason being, it costs a single low rune, it is extremely cheap, and yet it is the best melee weapon in the game by a long shot. The damage on it is absolutely insane, and it really crushes and ruins a lot of the awesome rare weapons and some of the other unique weapons that exist in the game. And it's very sad to me that this is the case because it just it just got too good, right? It just got to that point where it's like, well, you put on a grief. And even some of the other expensive rune words as well. You put on a grief, you put on a beast, you put on a botted, you put on, right? All of these high-end rune words in the game really just kind of overcrept in power a little bit too far, where they knocked out a lot of the other cool items. And this is why there's a lot of Diablo 2 purists who prefer classic, who prefer the earlier versions of Diablo 2 before this stuff existed. Because when you would run around, you could find an awesome rare weapon on the ground and you were like, yo, this is so sick. And it was great. And it was super fun to find it. And like, it was just, it was, I don't want to say more fun, but the itemization was even better in a way, in that regard, at least. Not in all regards, but in that regard. And you can tell this because let's go to slots that don't have rune words, like the boot slot. You know how many people identify rare boots? Everybody identifies rare boots because you can get awesome tri-res, rare, faster run walk, hit recovery boots, and it's amazing. And so boots and gloves and belts, you pick all of those up and you identify them because they can be awesome and they can be best in slot stuff for a character and get all the cool things and whatever. That's because there's no rune words that have replaced those slots, that have ruined them a little bit, where it's like, well, it's not really going to actually be better, so, why really pick it up? Right? Who picks up rare armors and things? Like, you just don't do it really, because it's just never going to be as good as one of those rune words. So this is true with, things like grief. This is true with things like fortitude and COH and all of those really high-end rune words. I felt they went a little bit off the charts with and kind of knocked out a lot of the cool rares and the fun of when a nice rare item drops, picking it up to see, did this roll something really sweet on it, right? Now we just pick it up to sell for gold. So I think that's one of the issues in the game, and something that I felt like they went too far with. Additionally, I think a giant issue in the game is charms. Charms are really cool, but endgame charms being your entire inventory is a problem. I mean, I'm going to open up Diablo 2 really fast. This is kind of a problem. Now, I like the idea of charms being really cool, but a charm is always worth more than the empty space in the inventory. And so where do my items go? Anything I pick up goes into this little cube right here. Right? This is my inventory, is the cube. And it's a mess. And so the problem is, it is a decision to fill up your inventory with charms. The problem is, it's always the best decision. So, what is the way we fix this? A lot of people suggest have the giant inventory, like in POD and PD2, and Median's got a big one as well, right? In any of these mods. What I don't like about that is it gives too much space, in my opinion. And a lot of people say, what's the big deal? Too much space, who cares? But it's the kind of same idea of what's the big deal about, removing item Tetris and just having all items be the same size so they all just fit together. And what's the big deal of all this, right? It's too much of a buff. And this is just my opinion. It's fine. I think mods having it is okay. But after playing through all of the mods, I don't like how much inventory space I get. I don't think it brings me back to town enough. And some of you are like, I don't ever want to go back to town. I just want to stay out there fighting all the time. But in my opinion, that's kind of a worse thing. I don't like it. I like a game that has the RPG elements, that has some sense of you fill up, you go back to town, you come back. Like, that's how it is. You make decisions on what you want to pick up and what you don't, and you have some limited space. So My proposal for this is doing the same idea, but at the smaller size, right? So I would be more on the idea of something like this. Let's just do this. There you go. Here is your charm inventory. Here is your main inventory. Something like that. Maybe even a 4-6 or something. I think something like this would be a lot more interesting. Now we have more of a choice. And many people will disagree with me on this. They want the giant inventory and never the space and all of this stuff. But I think something like this is more interesting, where I'm deciding, first off, it removes some of the charms. I think having so many charms is a bit too much. But I like the idea of having a little bit of decision here. You're going to like nerf the characters down some, but it also gives you the idea when you're playing along throughout the game that if you have a charm in an inventory, whatever, then that is space that's gonna be occupied that you're not going to be able to put something else into, right? So that's kind of the one problem I really have. Jeez, this is gonna be a mess. That's kind of the one problem I really have with the other stuff. And we'll even go look at the mods, is there's never really that meaningful decision. Great. Looks perfect. Wait, why am I missing 2 slots? Oh, I had 2 spaces open. So let me open up Project Diablo 2. Okay, let's just go into a character. And okay. Perfect. When I get to inventories that are this large, having charms down at the bottom, like I can have all of the charms right there. It never really becomes an issue. Right? Like if I ever find a charm that's okay, that's decent, that's whatever, I can always just put it down here and like I still have so much space in this inventory, right? And this is just my opinion. This is, I think, one of the most controversial opinions. A lot of people disagree. They look at this and they're like, yeah, give me all this space. For me, I look at this and I go, I don't like this much space. This is too much space. Because there's never that, I never have to make that decision of, do I actually want the charm or not? I just grab it, put it in the charm inventory, and I can still pick up everything else along the way, and then I'm still completely fine. So I think making some sacrifice with it is better, and the idea to me of limiting or removing the number of charms down to half a little 5x4 or 4x4 bag of charms, to me sounds a lot more interesting than just doubling the size of your inventory completely. That's just personal, but that is my thoughts on it. And that's a change, right? That's completely a change right there from Diablo 2. Sorry, let me just go back and forth, right? Like that's me saying I'm open to changing this game completely because I agree. This is a problem. This is a big weakness since they added charms. Charms always become too dominant. But I think removing some of the charms is almost better because there's a lot of charms that we carry. There's so many, and having 9 skillers and 8, whatever, all this stuff is like so much. So I actually would propose limiting the charms to only half your inventory or something, and minimizing that space, giving you some more space in your inventory to have open, and then at the same time, having less charms overall that you're dealing with. Right. So my proposal is don't buff charms, nerf charms. It's kind of where I'm at. Once again, not everybody will agree with that. That's totally fine. This is my own thoughts. We're all going to have different things. Now, another thing that's a problem in this game is melee. And this is a good and bad thing, right? It is both things. So let me bring this up for you guys. Here we go. So this right here, properties. This is the calculation for a melee character, right? Your chance to hit is 200% times your attack rating divided by your attack rating plus the defense rating of the person you're trying to hit times your level divided by your level plus the defending player's level. So what does this mean? It means two things. It means in one part, if you have good attack rating and your opponent has low defense rating, you have a better chance to hit. But that's only half the formula, because the other half is if your character level is lower than your opponent's character level, it's going to make it a lot more difficult for you to hit them, right? So there's two components, and I actually think each of these components combined makes melee a little bit too much of an issue. Not only do I need to have good attack rating on all of my gear and be able to beat their defense, but I also need to have a good level compared to their level. And this is something I feel like they could improve in some way. Obviously, ignore target defense just removes this part of the calculation, but you still have this part of the calculation going on, right? So I think overall, the combination of all of it ends up just being a little bit too difficult to hit things, especially as you're going through, especially for me as I'm a speedrunner. But even not speedrunning, if I'm just playing casually through the game, it still ends up being a little bit annoying and difficult. Now, something that is also difficult with this is the fact that monsters deal cold damage and freeze you, and melee sucks when you're frozen, and melee sucks when you're decrepified, and there is a lot of stuff that will do this in this game, especially when you get to Nightmare and especially when you get to Hell. And so that's also a big issue that I think exists in the game, is that there's so many things that are going to freeze you, and there's so few sources of cannot be frozen in the game. You're looking at Ravenfrost, Spirit Shroud, Rime Shield, Duriel Shell, Hawkmail, a few more obviously. And as you get end game, you can put a Cham rune or something, but Cham rune is the second hardest rune to find in the game. Death Sash, whatever it is. And there's just so few sources of cannot be frozen and so few sources of things to really get it that you're pretty much locked into either getting lucky and finding some unique or getting Rime Shield. Additionally, when you get later stages, you still always have to carry some sort of cannot be frozen wherever it is, and it just kind of becomes this requirement that is pretty annoying and kind of difficult to have. And you can't even do like 2 half freeze durations on pieces of gear to get a whole freeze duration so you cannot be frozen. Like, how cool would that be if you can wear boots with half freeze duration and a ring with half freeze duration and then you cannot be frozen? So I think there's something that needs to be done with melee, but at the same time, I also am totally cool with the fact that melee has its own style of play that's very interesting to me, right? And so that's one of the things that I love about it, is that melee's kind of difficult. Like, it's a harder playthrough of the game, but it's fun because it's a harder playthrough of the game. You're spending more time kiting, really, and positioning and making sure you're standing in the doorway so not all the monsters can hit you, and, you know, dealing with the, like, leashes of the bosses. And there's a lot of stuff that is hard but not too hard with Melee that makes it kind of fun there. I don't like the idea of Melee Splash as much. I don't like the idea of these sorts of things, as I feel like when you start doing that stuff, you start getting to a game where everything gets a little too homogenized. Everything gets a little bit too, we must do giant AoE, and that's the game, and it has to be balanced perfectly, and this is the way that it balances so that Melee can compete perfectly. Like, having it not compete perfectly is okay in my books, because a lot of times games that have difficult things like this it's just like a fun other thing you can do, right? This is a fun way that you can play through the game as a Melee character, and it's going to be harder. And that's just the way it's going to be, but that's fun. Like, when you're ready for a harder experience, a slower experience, an experience where you go farm more items and levels early because you're not a caster, it's just a different way to play the game, and I think it's really fun. And so that's what I like about this, but I also recognize that there are some issues. The biggest one for me really comes down to freeze and limited crushing cannot be frozen, and then the combination of levels plus attack rating versus defense and all of that ends up being a little bit too hard to hit things. I feel like the game really punishes you if you can't find some, you know, angelic ring amulet combination or some big AR stuff along the way. So I kind of wish it was a little easier, maybe like a little lower attack rating needed, or some level difference, not as big of an issue, or whatever it was, so you could hit a little more often, and a little bit easier for the can't be frozen. And like I said, having 2 half freeze durations create 1 cannot be frozen would be actually an interesting solution in my opinion. So I think those would be decent for the Melee of the game because it does have some issues. Now, let's go to some of the things proposed for Diablo 2 Resurrected, and just kind of stuff that I think would be overall decent for the game and I would be interested in seeing in the game. The first one is Auto Party. Why not? Allow me to just turn that on, because I'm going to be exiting and joining games with my friends over and over again and having to party every single time we get into a game. Okay, you know, is that a decision I'm making to party with them? Sure, but if I have to make the decision every single game just for the sake of making it every single game, I don't know. I think it's fine. Shared stash. I love the idea of a shared stash, mostly because we already do it with mules. We already have all of our mules, and our shared stash is just across all of the characters. The only difference is we have to just risk losing the item to transfer it to a different character because of that, right? So I would say having a shared stash totally makes sense, and just spread it across. And then having it as an unlockable, in my opinion, in single player would be great. Because I do think having a character not have a shared stash or not have an overly large stash is actually good on a playthrough of the game. Whether it's speedrunning, whether it's playthroughs, I've always enjoyed having to make a decision of, do I want to keep this item or do I want to keep this item? I think it's better. I think it's better to just do that. And so I like that idea personally. Some people would say just give it to me from the start. I think it's something that would be best unlocked after you kill like Hellbale or something, right? Or you beat every difficulty you beat, you get one more page of it or something, whatever it is, right? I think those sorts of things will be better. And then when you get to the end of it, then you can have your whole stash available, and you can start building an account with all of that. An item comparison button. I don't see why not. Once again, we already are comparing items. Now you're just, you can, instead of going like this, you just hold a button and it's fine. I think something like that's fine. An inventory auto sort. this is actually something I would totally be fine with and agree with, because in my opinion, it's not the physical doing all of the Tetris that's important. It is the idea of you have so much space in your inventory that's important. And whether or not that is just auto-sorted to get some space or just as is and then you can move it around, I think both of them is honestly fine. And I like the idea of the auto-sort for the people who don't like the inventory Tetris piece of it, right? Some people don't like that. That's totally fine. Additionally, you can always just move it without, right? I've noticed in games that have an auto sort that sometimes I still don't even use the auto sort because I'm still building out my own little Tetris for something to go in, and the auto sort's not perfect for it. Hotkeys for transferring items around faster. I don't know where people picked up the idea that I didn't like this. Maybe I accidentally said it or something. I love this idea. Being able to transfer an item from my character to my stash, to my cube, to the ground, whatever, I think it's superb. I've always loved it in the mods. I think it's, once again, I'm still making the click and making the decision. I'm just not dragging it over, right? It's just kind of like when I'm sitting in town, being able to just like push the stuff around makes it easier, right? So I like the instant transfer right there. Mod support. I, of course, am huge on the idea of mod support. And the reason I really love mod support is because there's a lot of really cool ideas that best exist in mods. There's plenty of really great crafting and stuff in Media and Excel. There's cool ideas with, the large inventories and the stacking and the changing of skills in PD2 and POD and all of these things that are fantastic, but they don't belong in the base game of Diablo 2, right? If you bring that to the base game of Diablo 2, it changes what the base game of Diablo 2 is, and now you're creating a mod of Diablo 2. Just have the mod exist. That's always been my idea, is have good mod support so that people will play those mods if they want to try all those different things. So I'm always about that. Another change I agree with is ladder-only runewords in single player. We already have all of the other ladder things there. You get the ladder-only items. You get the ladder-only crafting. The only thing you don't have is the ladder-only runewords, and I'm pretty sure it's because they just forgot to check the box that enabled the ladder-only runewords in single player. Like, they forgot to check a couple other boxes. So, in my opinion, just bring it on down. Bug fixes on bad bugs. Fire enchant in Nightmare, because they forgot to fix that once again. Multi-enchant stacking. Everybody's been hit and killed one shot by a soul that's coal enchant, light enchant, fire enchant, or whatever. The poison clouds down in Nilithax in the halls, right? Like, these sorts of bugs that are a mess. All for changing them, fixing them up, all of that stuff. Do I think they should change things like e-bugging armors and stuff? No, I think that's something that's become a part of Diablo 2, a part of the game, and is totally fine, right? And it's something that why change it is almost kind of my idea. It's a piece of the game. It makes finding an Eth armor without sockets and rolling it in the cube exciting, all of that stuff. I think it would be silly to change that sort of stuff. An in-game encyclopedia. I think this would be a great idea. Why? Because we already use the encyclopedia. We just Alt-Tab out, open up the website, and look at the crafting recipe or whatever it is. If I can just push the button in the game, make the same number of clicks, but not having to Alt-Time out, that seems better to me. Because there's a lot of things with runewords and stuff like that where it's like, more immersion as well. True. What if I can go to a little book in town and flip through the book and I can find all of the recipes and stuff? Keeps you in the game. I think it's better. A kill tracker or a stat tracker. I think something like that seems totally fun and totally fine. This is something that somebody suggested. I don't think it's necessary by any means, but I've always wondered how many billions of monsters I've killed. Sure, why not? Cow King kill. I think killing the Cow King and not having it close your cow portal would be a nice change because of all the times we accidentally kill the Cow King, or somebody in your party goes off and kills the Cow King to grief you, or whatever it is. I think doing this change would be totally fine. Now, some of the bigger ones, more endgame content. I'm totally open for the idea of there being more fights like the Pandemonium event, right? Or, your more fights, more acts, right? Adding in like an act 6 or something. So there's more content to go do with that. Mapping in the mods is kind of interesting. I wouldn't exactly want it in that way, but I think there's some idea for sure of additional content that could be added to Diablo 2 that could be really interesting. So I'd love to see a couple more bosses. Something I really liked was Median XL. Once you beat the game, there's like 40 bosses to go kill. I don't think they need to do all of this, but I think it's really interesting as you play through and fight through all of the different bosses and stuff to get all those cool charms. How it kind of works. So I actually think it's really interesting. I really like that idea. Skill balances, I actually agree with. And a lot of people are going to be like, no, you don't, Llama. You said skill balances are terrible. And what I said was, I think buffing only weaker skills is a bad idea. I think skill balancing is a lot better of an idea. So with balance, there's always, of course, the worry. First off, you're always going to have a meta. You're always going to have skills that are better than others. That's just always going to exist. I like there being skills that are worse and skills that are better, and that's always great. But what I think there needs to be is more really look at like the nerfing side than the buffing side. Don't just go in and buff Arctic Blast and buff Inferno and buff Blaze and buff Firewall and buff Hydra and buff this and buff that. And then it's like everything is just crazy, right? Instead, go in and knock down hammers some, knock down blizzard some, knock down lightning some, right? Knock some of those down, and all of a sudden, everything below it suddenly gets a little bit better, and there's more comparisons, right? To like, well, maybe this is actually going to be a little bit better for this and this, right? And that'll change the meta plenty without making the game a lot easier because everything is buffed. At the same time, while you do this, now you can maybe buff a little bit of, some of these things. Try and make like Arctic Blast a real skill or something, whatever, sure. But I still think it's really fun and good to have a large variety in the strengths of skills and all of the differences of the skills. And it's something that I appreciate about Diablo 2. Sometimes it's fun to play those wacky builds through the game. Whether it's speedrunning it, whether it's just a fun playthrough of it. There's so many times, I've done so many characters. Look at all my guided playthroughs of Martial Arts Sin and Hell Zealot and, Hammerden and Whirlwind Barbarian and all of this stuff. And every experience through the game is different. And I think it's really fun that that's the case. I think it's really fun that some of them suck. Some of them are good through normal. Some of them make it through hell. Some make it through nightmare. Some of them need more farming. Some of them are, all of that stuff. I think it's really interesting and keeps the game exciting because every time you pick up a character, you can decide if I want to make this, go on the easier route or the harder route and whatever. And because there's no greater rifts leaderboard thing in this game where you always need to be the best at the end, it's one where you can play around a little bit more because the game is the game itself of beating through it rather than just being at the end grinding a leaderboard. So I'm more on the idea of skill balance, but I always I have a lot of caution towards it because I always worry whenever I see a lot of skill balance, it tends to progress in the power creep manner. If we look even at a lot of the mods that have said they don't want to over, power creep, even after a few seasons, many of them have gotten very strong power creep just because they've buffed and they've buffed and they've buffed, and skills have just gotten too good a lot of times. So there's a lot of concern I always have around that, which is why I like the idea of looking at nerfing more than buffing. Okay. Things that I'm indifferent about. Auto gold pickup. I'm just pretty indifferent. It's a little bit disappointing to me because I don't like the idea of, it does make it a little easier. You're removing some of the clicks, some of the decisions. Gold's also not that important in the game, especially in the end game. You use it to like revive your mercenary and repair things, but not that crazy. It's really only important when you're playing through the game. And so it's one of those like, I'm going to naturally just become richer as I play through the game, just running around, right? Like that's just going to happen now because just over time, I'm always going to pick up more and more gold without, clicking on it. And so, I think it could be something that you're going to not have to deal with gold as much and not have to worry about that and whatever stuff. But I'm indifferent. Like I say, it doesn't bother me enough. It's just like a minor thing that I'm just like, yeah, it'll just make it a little easier. But it's not like game crushing easy or anything. And it'll be good to remove some of the clutter on the screen. I actually think with auto gold pickup, you won't need loot filters because gold is usually the thing that gets in the way most of the time for items. Console support, I'm indifferent. I'm not really going to play on console. I think it's cool that some people will get to play on console. I don't care too much myself, but I'm happy that some people will get to. Auto toggle loot to always show. Some people seem to really love that. It doesn't really work well with the Diablo mechanically. Just the way that Diablo is built, it doesn't work amazingly well because of how when I was talking with the devs and stuff, that was like a big thing I talked to them about. From how you're opening things and the way it's built in with the alt key and all of this stuff, and like how you have your skills on your left and right click. And there was just some stuff about it that they said was just like not great. But I don't care that much. I think if that's something that you want and they could figure out, sure. I don't think we're going to get it just because of the way that Diablo 2 is built. Additional tooltips. I think that's totally fine. Showing the mins and max of stats and stuff. I think that's actually like interesting for a lot of people. They want to know, did I roll perfect fire res on this ring or not? I think that's fine. I think it's a cool thing to see. And it's just giving you a little more information to digest so you can make more decisions. I think it actually could be slightly in my I agree section. Pindle portal after the waypoint. Once you get the waypoint in the halls, you no longer have your Pindle portal. Do I think it needs to remain open? I don't know. It feels like the Pindle portal already is a little bit of an issue because it just ends up being like such a good farm spot. But, does there need to be some like nerf to Pindle slightly? Should the portal always be open? I feel like there's some discussion to be had there that's a little bit beyond that idea. Maybe always having it open, kind of like you always have your Eldritch farm nearby. Maybe. Crafting, I would say, is a bit too unrewarding possibly. Works better in multiplayer. We already talked about that a little bit before. I'm a little indifferent, but I feel like it could be improved a little bit. Just be careful. Things I disagree with. Personal loot. Personal loot, in my opinion, or instance loot, is just not the Diablo 2 experience. That's just plain and simple. That's not to say personal loot shouldn't exist. It's not to say personal loot should never exist in any game or anything like that. It's just to say in the Diablo 2 game, with just the game itself. The experience has always been running around and having party loot. That's just it. Whether it is I'm with my party and we're all looking for a white sword or a crystal sword or a broadsword or whatever it is so we can saga it for spirit, and oh, you missed it, but hey, go back there, I saw a sword on the ground, or things like that. Whether it's just dropping stuff easily for each other that, hey, I saw you pick that up, can you drop it for me? Or if it's everybody in a group and you see a GG drop happen, everybody all together can react and be excited. Yo, that Griffin's, that's sick. Or everybody competing for that and diving on top of it, trying to pick it up, and the person who gets it and you're like, ah, dang it. Or if you get it, you're like, yes, I finally got it. Like, that is just a part of the Diablo 2 experience that has always existed. And I would be very sad if they removed that. Because it appeals more, once again, to the casual player who just wants to get their stuff and not have to worry about picking it up and all of those things. But it really drops a lot of the excitement that I've always found when I'm playing the game and something awesome drops on the ground. And, you know, if I'm the person, it also gives you kind of the... It has this fun idea of where do you play yourself? Like, there's some risk involved. If I'm standing way in the back of the room because I don't want to get hit, then I'm far away from the loot. If I'm standing right next to the dude, smacking him in the face, then I can pick the loot up faster, right? So there's always the idea of where do I stand compared to where is the loot? And this is kind of my idea, and what I really like about it is you play that risk versus reward of, well, my character's kind of squishy, and if I die, it dies in hardcore, or I lose experience in softcore, but I want to be close in case something good drops, and so, you know, you do that. Is it perfectly fair for everybody? No. But that's just kind of how it is. Life isn't perfectly fair, kind of, you know, like there's going to be sometimes in a game and someone's going to have Picket installed. And, you know, once again, hacks and bots suck. And I hope that they can do stuff to remove that as best as they can. But like, there's going to be times when that happens. There's going to be times where you try and pick something up, but you're lagging on the server. And so you don't get it in time, whatever stuff. And then you're going to have the reverse where somebody else has an issue and their game crashes and you pick it up and whatever. Like, it's just going to go around, and that's just the life of it. And it's just, I just really prefer the way that it plays. That's just the Diablo 2 experience. And I just don't think that piece of it needs to change. I just don't think doing loot rolling or anything like that, like that's the World of Warcraft experience. Go play that if you want to do loot rolling. Solo farming or solo loot, that's, you know, like, go play those games. Like, that's just kind of the thoughts that I have with it. Like, every game's got their own style for loot, and I really like the shared loot idea that exists within Diablo 2. And there's plenty of loot that you'll miss and plenty of loot that you'll get along the way. But, you know, it's cool to me. Moving on, I don't like the idea of unsocketing and being able to keep anything when you unsocket. I think the idea of having permanence, having decisions in the game is very important. Whether this is getting the runes back, getting the gems back, you know, being able to unsocket or remove the last skill you just put in, or, you know, adjust your stats, all of these things. The more that you allow for this stuff, the less that you have with the permanence of a decision, and the less that it kind of matters, right? There needs to be consequence for all of the decisions that you make, in my opinion. And yeah, and that's just simple on that. This goes along with infinite/easy respec. That's something I've never been a fan of. Once again, when you remove that permanency, or there's not a big cost to change it, then the decisions just become less important. It's just, why does it matter how I build my character through the game? I can always just respec it whenever I want. And, you know, simple as that. And I understand for someone who's newer to the game, that's frustrating. And I like the idea of having some form of respec. Like, I think Diablo 2 is actually in a good position with it. You get your respec from each of the Den of Evils, plus you have respec tokens at the end. There's a cost associated. There's limited respecs that you're going to get, but you're not just going to always be able to just change to whatever skills you want, whenever you want, all of that stuff. I just don't like it that much. The characters, once again, lose their sense of identity a lot more. And so that's something I like in Diablo 2 is your character has identity completely. It is the Blizzard Sorceress. And if you want to change that to a Light Sorceress, you're changing the character. You're finding all of the new gear, all of the new charms, all of that stuff. And it is a very big piece to determine. Additionally, if you want to re-roll for a 6-bow CTA, you're costing the runes of the 6-bow, or of the CTA. And so you have to go through multiple of those. Maybe you have an awesome base weapon for a grief or something, but you have to sack those runes to roll a better grief in it. But you want to keep the base because it's so good. Who knows? Lastly, making items and rune drops easier, I disagree with. Not everybody should find everything, and I don't just believe this in Diablo 2, I believe this in any game, and there's many games I play casually where I don't get everything. I kind of look at it a little bit like in Fall Guys. In Fall Guys, there is a Golden Knight skin that you get for 3,000 crowns, which is insane. You have to have 3,000 wins to get the Golden Knight skin. And I saw someone come in and complain that the Golden Knight skin was too ridiculous of a skin and they need to drop it way down so that everybody can have a chance to get it. And I thought, man, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm never going to get the Golden Knight skin. But you know what? The guy with 2,000 hours should be able to get something cooler than me. I'm sorry. That just makes sense to me. Like, that just makes sense. In Diablo 2, the person who plays more hours, who plays more skilled hours, who farms better, who farms longer, who does all of these things, should have a higher chance at finding cooler things than me. And there should be some crazy items that give them the sense and purpose to keep farming, to try and get the cooler stuff, all of those things, right? Make it so that the casual player can still get plenty of stuff, but the high-end player can get more stuff. That just makes sense to me in a game. This way the casual player has enough fun, but it doesn't drop off. If a casual player can get all of the stuff in 100 hours, then what does the experienced player do? What do I do for the remaining hours now that everything's gotten? I have nothing to improve. I have nothing cool to go after. To me, it's just not fun, right? So I love the idea of things being hard to get, hard runes to find, hard items to find, all of this stuff. And I think not having all of that stuff or not having there be rewards and all of that hurts the overall player experience and player retention. And so that's, something I've seen a lot of people ask about is, oh, will they make it easier? And I just completely disagree. I just completely dislike it. I don't think the casual player should get everything. And I say that to myself as well when I play so many other games, right? I say, yeah, I shouldn't get everything in this game because I'm not going to commit all that time. And that's cool. And mobile games just make you pay $20,000 to get all this stuff. So, that's why mobile games suck. But this is Llama's thoughts on Diablo 2 and on D2R and changes and all of that stuff. I hope this clears some stuff up. Once again, all of this is my opinions. You can disagree with me completely on every single point if you want. That's fine. I ask that you simply treat me as a human being who has opinions that are just about a video game and not as some insane person or some, giant jerk on the internet who's trying to ruin the world or whatever stuff. It's amazing how crazy people get when you don't agree with them. So that's that. I hope that makes some sense, YouTube. I hope that clears some things up. And I look forward to D2R. I think they're going to do a great job with the game. But yeah, until next time, mwah! Peace, YouTube.